All right, folks, thanks for joining us today. So a little intro to this talk. It was an idea that popped into my head. I'd actually been talking to who I think last week's speaker, who's joined us today, Jerome. We're on the same project together, and I was talking about this, an idea for a talk. And I guess the quick way out for thinking of topics is to try and talk about what I do. So this talk is largely about, I guess, not my day-to-day, but so much as it's to do with the job of a project director. And the little bit of nuance to it is that I've tried to find a way to talk about project direction with respect to being as unintrusive as possible to the development team. Here is, so something I should say is this is going to be beneficial for anybody that's thinking about leadership in the future, and it'll probably ring a lot of bells for folks that are already leading project teams. So the program today, it looks busy, but it's kind of three sections here. So I want to try and get us all on the same page for a few things, a bit of shared understanding. I'm going to talk a little bit about people, and that's more to do with a caveat for the remainder of the presentation, which is very much something that's a little bit more mechanical and sort of takes away the people element of project leadership. So the first step here is to talk about some shared understanding. The interesting piece here was I'm trying to talk to craft in this presentation, and the word craft has got a few connotations already, and I think certainly in England the word craft for me springs to mind like arts and crafts and things like that, right? And the dictionary definition talks to making stuff with your hands, and that's great because I think that applies very easily to software engineers, right? And we can make that jump and say, yeah, absolutely, they're building things with their hands. It kind of excludes everybody else on the project team though, right? And so rather than sort of shoehorn in some way that I build stuff with my hands on a project team, I've decided to sort of redefine craft because that suits me a little bit better. And so the definition that I've got, and like this definition is really what I think about when I hear the word craft, is creating or doing something with intent, with consideration for both the process and the quality of the outcome. And I think this might, I hope this will ring a few bells with a few folks on the call today, and is not a sort of a huge departure from what you might be thinking about when you hear the word craft. The next piece is project direction. This is very much me sort of just jumping in for folks that aren't at Eighth Light. This might seem like well, the role of project director at Eighth Light is something quite specific. There's a whole chunk of different things that are sort of agency specific. For the purposes of this talk, I'll focus on the sort of delivery piece, right? So project directors at Eighth Light are ultimately responsible for the successful delivery of projects. So this will parallel things that you'll see out in other companies, so Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, project managers, those sorts of things wrapped into the same role. At a consultancy, that's like the role includes interviewing and managing and sales or whatever else. But we can ignore all of those things for now and just say like this is that sort of project manager type role. And so if we know what I'm doing, then I'd like to try and understand and align with everybody on like why I do that, right? And I think it goes to the question of how would you build a start or build a piece of software, right? And I think sort of the naive approach would be come up with an idea, get a group of talented software developers into the same place and let them have a go at it, right? And if you pick a very experienced team, you might have high expectations that it would be exactly what you had hoped it would be right at the end. And I think the reality of that is that humans are inherently curious, inquisitive, and it's very easy for people to take sensible things and them actually be not the best thing for the project at the time. So when I talk about providing focus, what I'm doing is talking to essentially steering a ship, right? If the ship is the project team itself, right? And I'm not doing very heavy-handed stuff. It's very much like tweaks here and there, and it plays to a book that I was recommended recently by Jerome called Essentialism, right? And that book talks to the idea of constantly asking yourself, what is the most important thing I could be working on right now? And I think software teams are quite good at doing that, but I also think that having someone in a position where I'm sat, liaising with product as well as the development team, I can be sort of somebody that helps enforce some boundaries and provide that focus. So it's not, I don't want to come across like I'm saying I don't trust my teams, because that's definitely not the case. It's quite the opposite. In fact, it's developers trying to be helpful and being helpful that actually is something that I'm trying to keep an eye on, right? And it's very easy when you're in the detail to see, oh, there's an opportunity to do something really good here, and then lose focus on the high level goal up here, which isn't always reinforced as it should be. So that's sort of the context that I wanted to get everybody on today, and just say, right, we're talking about craft, we're talking about project direction, and a project director is around to try and help the team by providing focus. The remainder of this talk after this slide is going to get into quite a tooling-based discussion about process, right? The analogy I'm going to play to you is that you can treat your project team like a production system. And in the way that you would might monitor things in a production system, you can treat a project team in the same way. Originally this slide was right at the end, and it felt a little bit jarring because I think it was like a sort of a gotcha at the end. And I'm going to put that gotcha right at the front, right? And that is, definitely don't treat your project team like a production system. Your team is a group of individuals, and you cannot possibly hope to succeed if you don't treat them like that. So as much as this talk is going to be focused on tooling and process, you cannot possibly hope to succeed if you don't also address the people element. And like the people element of project leadership is multiple talks in itself. So I'm going to avoid that today, but I'm going to just highlight the fact that you shouldn't in the real world. So let's get into it. This idea of mirroring a production team, a project team with production support, or supporting a production system, really came out of something very basic. I think it was like the first topic I'm going to talk to you about, like logging. And as I worked on this talk, I found that the parallels actually were there were far more than I had realized initially, which was interesting. But I think as you'll note, as I get further through these, the analogy starts to break down a little bit. So fair warning that this thing is an imperfect model. And what's the purpose of all of this? Like, why am I talking about treating things like a production system? One of the things that I've been working on lately is trying to, and it's coincided with managing more and more projects, is finding the sort of most lightweight way to keep a team on track and moving in the right direction. And the thing I want to avoid, and the thing that I've experienced as a developer historically and seen in some clients, is whenever anything goes wrong on a project, the tendency is always towards micromanagement. It's always towards status updates. It's always towards interrupting developers and getting information so that you can report up to folks that need to understand how the project's going. And so this is an effort to try and avoid that outcome and drive people towards getting the answers themselves. So the first piece here is logging. Logging, I hope relatively obviously to everybody, is about making user interactions visible. And the parallel that we have in project direction is our Jira boards. I'm going to use Jira as the example throughout, but there's obviously like Pivotal Tracker and Trello and all the rest of them. And I think the focus here is what logging does for a production system, your ticketing system should do for your project team, right? And it's about making work visible and prioritizing what I think is small tickets moving through the board is much better than a few big tickets not moving at all. And a question I'll often get about this is like, well, what if I've got a big ticket with lots of subtasks on, like underneath it? This is I guess a bit of personal preference, but my view on it is that having the individual tickets on the board is far superior in the ability to take a snapshot and look at the thing and see like where the progress is and where the progress isn't. We've had a number of projects suffer with a lot of fantastic work happening behind one ticket and nobody really understanding what was going on. When you don't really understand what goes on, that's when you get like, oh, I need to interrupt that developer and ask lots of questions and disrupt their day, which is what we want to try and avoid. Sort of follow up to that is we're in this, well, more so today than we have been previously, right? We're in this world where communication can come through a number of means, and as everyone's remote, it tends towards Slack and email and things like that. The nice thing to achieve is that any sort of solid comments make their way into tickets rather than being separated into other mediums, just because again, it just helps to avoid interrupting your team. So the natural follow on from logging would be alerting in your production system, right? And like the basic would be, I want to alert when I see an error log of some kind, right? And so what are the errors for a project team? Well, it's probably when stuff gets blocked, and also when something's not moving, right? So like a timeout or something. Those sort of parallel things being stuck on the board for a long time, right? So something's in review for 5 days. Like, why is that PR there for so long? Those are the things you want to be flagging. Jira is pretty bad for this, right? It's like it's all on or all off type thing as default, right? And so it pays dividends to sort of tailor that as quickly as possible to avoid the sort of the noise and the inevitable. I'm just going to ignore all of those alerts because there's just too many of them. And the other thing that you want to make sure you're getting alerted to is sort of the human side of things, like the holidays and vacation, right? You don't want those things to be surprises. You don't want those things to be hidden when you're planning the next iteration. Those are things that you want to be aware of in advance. So there are a very select group of things that you want to be alerted on. And I think this is sort of the main hit list. As we follow on from alerting, I had a look at tracing. Now, this one's an interesting one because this is, you know, when I think about tracing, right, I'm thinking about debugging something. In the project team scenario, I think it has two purposes, right? There is that debugging element, but there's also a focus element. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do on our projects, and that we've been quite effective at doing on a number of them at the moment, is making sure that anything that's being worked on ties all the way back up to the highest level goals of the company, right? And that should be, I mean, I think that should make sense to a lot of people, right? The idea that the C-level set a strategy for the company, that filters down into product people that set epics. Epics would feed into features, into tickets into PRs into commits, right? having that traceability from the commit all the way back up to strategy, in many ways is an enforced boundary, says the folks on the team are definitely working on the right thing, because it all ties back to what the company is aiming for, right? This is not always the case, right? You'll often have projects, especially projects that have been running for a long time, they'll lose this sense of focus. There's often a lot of focus right at the start of projects, a lot of drive towards a particular goal, and then it goes into sort of maintenance mode or ticking over, and then things start to lose some of that focus. The second piece of tracing is that debugging part, right? And it's something that you don't really get to experience unless you've either worked at somewhere for 15 years, or you've landed on a legacy code base that's been around for 10, 15 years. I think you can't quite appreciate how useful it is to be able to trace back why this particular piece of code ended up in the code base 10 years ago. It's such a useful thing to be able to do if you're trying to, it's that saying about writing the code for the person that's maintaining it, right? This traceability is just infinitely helpful. And again, if you've got traceability built into your process, you don't have to disturb anyone else when you've got to investigate something, right? It's all built in there for you. There is an aside here, which is there are a lot of clients where this is like a compliance piece, right? Anyone working in like the medical space, med tech or anything like that, probably finance as well, right? There has to be a specific tie-in from a requirement level all the way down to the commit level for audit purposes and things like that. So there are certain clients where this is sort of a regulatory requirement, but I think for most teams, it's just extremely helpful as a basis. The next piece, smoke testing. This is an interesting one, and I think maybe not super obvious, but I think it's really a powerful tool, right? We smoke test production systems to make sure that they're working, right? Like the changes we've made have improved things. What's the parallel there? Well, I think as a project leader, if you've got the technical background, then just jump in there, try and fix a bug, right? Get a commit in, go through the pain of the PR process, go through the pipelines, get the end-to-end tests running, get the unit tests running. If it's the first time doing it, right, does the README work? All of those things. What you're doing is getting yourself that understanding of how are the developers working, what's their environment like, what are their pain points, gives you the ability to build some empathy with their process, and also lets you, be aware of things that are coming up, right? You've got a feed of requirements coming in from product, and then every now and then someone on the dev team will talk to like, oh, we really need to fix this thing in our pipelines. And if you've experienced it yourself, you know full well like what they're dealing with and how much of a pain it is. So I think this one's really important. If you're not technical, I'd just encourage you to sit down with one of the members of the team for an hour or two and work through this process with them, right? See it firsthand. I think it's just a really valuable way to get closer to the ground on the realities of what it is working with the code base. So moving on to, I guess, the more serious issues, as it were, right? Support tickets. So this is the parallel in a production system. This is a customer reaching in saying, I can't do X, I can't do Y. This is broken, this isn't broken. The problem here is that this metaphor kind of breaks down because the other part of this is sort of general product feedback. So the way I look at this is that there's two parallels here, right? There's stand-ups and retrospectives as sources for this kind of information. Now, stand-ups are likely to produce blockers, or they should if you've got an effective stand-up, right? Produce is the wrong word. RA space for blockers to be highlighted is what I mean. So stand-ups are going to produce that support ticket type feedback that needs to be actioned or should be triaged immediately, right? You can look at blockers just in the same way that you look at support tickets, right? With a priority triage system like P1 to P4, P1, like the whole team is disrupted, right? So I don't know, GitHub actions are down, so your pipeline's broken. P4, you know, I'm working on this small fix and I need a bit of information from so-and-so, they're on holiday for the rest of the week. Fine, like P4 can wait for that person to come back, get the information. P1, like tools down, everybody needs to focus on fixing this problem so that we can continue to work effectively as a team. Retrospectives offer that more generic feedback. I look at it like the 5-star rating you get on the App Store for an app or something like that. It's, I've been using this app for a while and these are the problems I'm seeing. Your retrospective is typically going to give you that sort of information. It's like larger issues that are affecting a proportion of the team, typically much harder to fix, require a lot more effort and a lot more thought. But in the same breath, they are just as important to try and get right. And so, this might be painfully obvious to everyone on this call, right? I realize that. I have seen project leaders say, no, I don't go to the retrospectives. That's for the team, right? And I'd like people to feel that they are part of the team. And I understand the sort of giving the team space to talk about things if the project leader is the problem. But if you don't attend those things, you are missing out on a wealth of information that you should have in order to help the team. One of I think there's a penultimate piece on here is Chaos Monkey, which for those that don't know, is a piece of Netflix tooling that they produced. And what it does is they sort of turn it on during working hours and it randomly takes down pieces of their infrastructure. And it's a way for their development teams, or probably their DevOps teams specifically, to make sure that their systems are resilient, right? So it's a forced resiliency test. This is where, full disclosure, this is where the analogy starts to break down, right? Because there really isn't a very strong argument for deliberately disrupting your team. Just probably don't do that as a first step. However, there are ways in which you experience this stuff in real life, right? People take holidays, people get sick, people have to be out for afternoons. And those are your opportunities to carefully monitor what's happening, right? So at the sort of best case, right, you've got, I guess, the more inexperienced member of the team, they're out for a day. And the only impact is that progress on the feature that they're working on slows down. The other end of that is someone impactful on the project takes a few days off, right? They turn out to be the person that reviews every PR. And so most PRs have got one approval, but not two, and everybody's actually waiting for that person to come back to give them that piece of feedback, right? And it's something that you will only spot when people are away. And this has happened to me in the last month or two. We've had someone off for a couple of days, and it's really interesting to see what stops working, or what stops working quite as efficiently. And so this is sort of my unforced way of talking about it. I see a comment there from Stephen. I think real life is your chaos monkey. Stuff happens. Watch to see how resilient we are. It's absolutely right. I've called out holidays and sickness there, but yeah, that's spot on. We have to. It's about being observant of what's going on, and then playing that back and making sure you understand how your team is working. The final piece on treating your team like a production system. You'd probably find that some folks in like level 1 or level 2 support will have some form of operational dashboard. The big caveat here is that operational dashboards typically show metrics, right? And metrics aren't always a fantastic way to evaluate your team, right? If you look at PRs merged, that might be a bad metric week by week to make judgments on your team. It's information that you can use to ask sensible questions, but not necessarily much more than that. One of the difficulties that we have, made more so in like the agency world, where every client uses a different set of tooling, GitHub or Bitbucket or Jira or whatever else. It's not easy to get all of this stuff presented in the same place. And so I've never successfully found a way to do that. However, recently was made aware of this tool. It's been around for 5-6 years, I think, at this point. Not had much experience with it, but I think this is an area where you can get that parallel of a organizational dashboard, but it's giving you some metrics which I think are genuinely very useful. So I pulled a few screenshots out of it, just try and give you a bit of an understanding of what the tool does. But it's free for open source, and then there's like paid tiers or whatever. But the idea is that it runs a dynamic analysis against your code base and lets you know where complexity is increasing, where you've got the most churn, which particular developers have got the siloed knowledge of parts of your code base. It would, on first glance, appear to be a really powerful tool. I ran it last night against the Phoenix code base, and it's got statistics showing you, like, over time, over the 4 or 5 years that it's been being built, over time, the code health over the last year, the code health's gone down. It's identified these red spots are areas of concern, and it's got this, a whole wealth of other metrics, including developer productivity and all sorts of things that the paid version gives you access to. 92% of this code base written by 30 developers, probably not a problem. I'm sure there are open source libraries with 92% written by 1 or 2 developers, which is some area for concern. But it's an interesting tool that I think actually does talk to this idea of an organizational dashboard, giving you some insight across your whole team. So we've come back full circle to where I wanted to start, which was talking about craft, right? I'll remind everybody, definitely don't treat your project team like a production system. But the tools and techniques that I've just gone through, I think, are a really easy way to get to a point where you understand your team without being the person that disrupts them, right? I hope a lot of people on the call are aware of the manager-maker schedule, right? The idea that a manager's day is broken down into 30-minute or 1-hour slots. And the maker, the software engineer, the developer's time needs to be much bigger blocks of work, like 2 or 3, 4 hours of undisturbed work, right? Just to get themselves into the problem. I think these ideas help towards this outcome of allowing the team the autonomy and the space to work, but getting you the information you need to do your job, which is leading the team, reporting to the necessary people you need to report to, and providing the focus that you need to provide. So it's an analogy. It's got its flaws, as they all do. But if you think about this thing and look at the process, I think it's definitely something that you can take a few ideas away from and try them out on your own projects.